Welcome to the Self-Control Show, a podcast for men. If you get defensive, shut down, or find yourself going 0 to 100, you're in the right place. Most men were never taught how to regulate their emotions. And this show is about changing that. It's not therapy, and it's not fluff. It's training. I'm your host, Jason Schnitzer. Let's get to work. What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Today we've got another awesome topic, and it's one that seems to be top of mind lately, coming up a lot. And it's all about defensiveness, kind of like what's going on, why it happens, and how to go about changing it. And one of the number one things where I find guys in coaching is, this common theme of either they notice it or it's being reflected back to them by their significant other. Is anytime that there's a problem, there's constructive feedback or criticism, it's like, man, I can't stop getting defensive. And then in that defensive state, there's a level of reactivity that basically has you, elevating your tone, right? Saying things in maybe a reactive way, perceiving an attack, which ultimately leads to a fight, right? All of a sudden there's a conflict that turns into it's me versus her versus like, hey, what's going on for you? How can we work this out? What can I change to, make sure this doesn't happen again? What can you change to, help me notice that the thing's happening again in a constructive way that ultimately leads to connection, right? And a lot of times, where we find ourselves is after the fact, looking back and kind of caught in that same pattern. Maybe after the fact, we can see that, hey, we were wrong, and we go back and apologize. But ultimately, what that can lead to is just like an inevitable apology tour without change, which, eventually just becomes lip service. And then there's resentment, frustration, and a lot of times conflict, which at one point was, I don't know, maybe a little more activating, explosive, just kind of turns into avoidance, shutdown, and, passive aggressive tension, etc. So if you find yourself here, just know that like, hey, you're not alone, right? This is a normal thing. And let's get into, why that happens. And of course, if you've listened to my stuff before, you know that, I take a nervous system approach to this, a regulation approach, an emotional regulation approach. And basically, practically, physiologically, what's happening is whenever you're in a situation where, your wife walks in the room and you see the look on her face, you hear the tone, right? You sense something is up. You just like feel it, right? Your nervous system, whether you know it or not, is already activated. So in that moment, what's basically shutting down is the part of your brain that you need to have on to be able to like problem solve the right way and to be able to hear and listen and not fix, or to stay in the pocket, as I like to say, and not shut down and collapse. And when your system gets activated and you shift into like a more of a reactive state, fight or flight state, basically you've already lost, right? So for most of us, like, unless you know that you're in that state, it's like you're already behind the eight ball. You're already fighting a losing battle or an uphill battle. So you need to be able to regulate. You need to be able to ground in the moment. You need to be able to breathe. You need to be able to notice that you're activated so that you can stay, in it and not collapse, right? And then the next thing that you need to be able to do after that is shift your focus, kind of like if there is activation there, kind of set it aside and then be able to listen to the thing that's going on, right? In a lot of ways, if there's a complaint, let's just say, right? And if that complaint feels like an attack, you're never going to be able to hear it. What you're going to do probably is try to fix it, solve it, deflect, right? Get defensive, shut down. So again, we want to notice those responses, those automatic reactions, if you will, so that we can like come back online, right? And then we can practice active listening, right? We can get to the bottom of what it is for your wife that is the problem, right? And in order to do that, I mean, instead of trying to fix it, instead of trying to deflect, instead of trying to like, point out the 9 things that you did do instead of the one thing that you didn't do, or point back to like all the other things. Sometimes I think of it as like two cups. One of them's full with all the things that you do, but there's like something missing over here. And your wife bringing you, information about this other cup being empty is not an attack on you. It's not like to put down any of the things that you're working so hard doing. It's like an attempt for connection, or an ask or a bid for connection of a cup that maybe some of us aren't even aware exists. What they're asking for usually is like an emotional connection, right? To be heard, to be seen, to be in the presence of, to be witnessed, like some version of that, right? But if we've never been told how to do that, taught how to do that, it's going to be really hard to do that. And sometimes it can be really frustrating, right? It can feel like, she doesn't appreciate me, all the stuff that I work hard to do. And it's like not in negation of that, right? Because the unfortunate thing is sometimes we'll double down on the things that we are really good at in, an attempt to fix the problem. Like, hey, if I just make more money, like maybe this problem will go away, right? And the truth is most families would take less money for more of your presence, right? Because that's like it starts to be like this pattern that spirals out of control, because like we try to fix something by doing something that we're already doing good, even better, which leaves us with even less resources to be present in the moment, which makes it easier for us to be triggered and go offline, which makes it harder to see, hear, validate, and be with, your partner, your wife, your kids, even. And again, like that pattern can play out over days, months, years, decades sometimes. And, sometimes it can feel like, is there hope, right? Is there ever a light at the end of the tunnel? Because like, I don't like her. She doesn't like me. There's this resentment that keeps building, right? But the thing is, getting to the root of the issue a lot of times is just, okay, there's something that you're doing, that you're automatically doing, that we need to stop, right? And a lot of times when there's distress, when there's a problem, usually it means that there's an emotion there that's difficult for you to feel. And if you don't know how to regulate your emotions, basically they're going to be in control, right? You're going to be reactive. Sometimes it can feel like, you know, your EQ is low, right? You have the emotional capacity as a 10-year-old or a teenager sometimes, because we often will revert back to, these immature ways of responding, reacting, playing games, keeping score, shutting down, getting loud. And again, like having our tone change and not even realize it until, your wife is like, hey, you're yelling. And it's like, it doesn't feel like you're yelling. It's like, no, I'm just passionate. Or it's like, this is what I'm used to when I grew up, chaos. And, there's all different kind of ways that can look. But ultimately, what's underneath that, what's at the bottom of it, is just, you're missing tools, you're missing skills, you're missing understanding and education around like what's actually going on for you, what's happening in the situation, and really how to win that argument and solve the problem is to just be able to listen and understand and articulate what the other person's going through, right? And you can't do that until you are able to stay regulated and calm in that moment, because ultimately it's like when you're calm, like there's this saying where it's like, if there's heat temperature rising, like there's activation, right? Your wife, your kids, right? Instead of being the thermometer where the reading just goes and jumps up to what is that heat that's in the room, you want to be able to use your nervous system as the thermostat, right? If you're calm in the moment, regardless of like what's going on, what we want to do is be able to bring the temperature back down. And like, this is not about suppressing, right? Some guys are like, hey, I'm actually like a really chill, easygoing dude. And like, when I ask them like, oh, okay, cool. Like, how do you do that in the moment? Basically, and this is no shame, like they don't know, right? And usually what that means is you are suppressing, repressing, bottling up, compartmentalizing your feelings, right? And calling it like stoicism, calling it like calm, right? Calling it non-reactive. But really what you're doing is like you're tamping it down. Like that is things that are going into the pressure cooker, which usually is what you do all day at work. And ultimately, what that leads to at home is that explosion over a little thing. When your wife gives you feedback or is frustrated with the kids or her work or whatever it is, that's just the straw that breaks the camel's back and sets you off into that defensive, deflective, reactive response. And again, like how you shift that is just noticing, hey, like what's going on in your system, right? What happens for you? And what we want to do is be able to again, regulate that, ground back into the moment, feeling your feet in the ground, noticing like if you're carrying tension in your chest and your shoulders, can you take a few deep breaths, right? Can you look around and bring yourself back into the moment so that you can then activate new skills, right? Instead of reacting, deflecting, defending, right? What we can do is active listen, right? Repeat back what you hear, make sure to validate the situation, what their subjective reality is, right? Even if you don't agree with it, this isn't about being right or being wrong. This is about understanding, seeking to understand what their lived experience is. Like a lot of times it can be like a news reporter or like a customer service rep in that moment, right? You ever been really frustrated, called a company? I know that I've done this and I'm like, you know what, this time I'm really going to let this customer service rep have it, right? And they're just like so nice. Hey, Jason, thanks for calling. What can I help you with? Like, how can I be of assistance? I'm here for you, right? And, just hearing that, the tone of their voice, the way that they say it, the genuine, sincere care coming from them starts to calm you down, right? And I know, guilty, but at the end of the call, like I know the type of energy I was bringing into that call. And I've even found I'm the one apologizing to this guy, right? Hey, sorry, I know I was frustrated and this isn't your fault, right? And I'm like, man, that guy or gal was really good at what they did. And all they did was listen to me, heard me out, repeat it back to make sure that they understood, empathize, let them know how, let me know how, yeah, that does suck, right? And I'm like, yeah, it sucks. And what that does is it's just like calming me down, calming me down, calming me down without even me realizing it a lot of the times. And this is true for anybody, right? It works on your wife, works on your kids, works with your coworkers, your boss, your employees, etc. When you get really good at this and you start being able to turn defensiveness into like a signal that basically it's time to shift into like, hey, an active listen and not defending, then that allows and opens the door to connection. It opens the door to repair. It opens the door to preventing, things from happening in the future. And what it also does is it starts putting a tally over into the other side of the score sheet. Not that we're keeping score here, but like what we want are receipts basically, where, because sometimes it can get to a point where you just like assume the worst in the other person, right? Which basically is like taking residue from the last fight and then that like sort of like brings it up into this, and you start telling stories and having beliefs about your partner that may or may not be true, right? But you're basing it off of a real experience that you had with them. But ultimately, what you're fighting with is like kind of like their patterns of defensiveness, maybe your patterns of, all of a sudden like it's not coming off as nice, right? Because there's two people here, right? Sometimes you ask, you ask, you ask, you ask, right? And it's like defensive shutdown deflection. And eventually that like gentle ask turns into frustration, resentment, and criticism. And it gets like, the Gottman say criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling are the four horsemen, if you will, that show up in relationships. And I'm here to tell you where it starts is your ability to maintain or not maintain regulation in conflict, right? Because when you can get really clear on that for yourself, then at least you can have the most productive conflict possible, which will lead to potentially different outcomes, right? And for the most part, if you were to ask your wife, probably 90% of the time or more, she doesn't necessarily need you to solve the situation. She just needs you to understand where she's coming from, right? Which ultimately solves the situation, right? Because then when we don't get defensive, there are other things that cascade in that, because sometimes we can do things like appease. We can say yes when we mean to say no. We can overcommit, right? We can say, okay, yeah, I got this. But then all of a sudden we don't have the capacity to like meet that thing that we said yes to. And it just becomes another reason why, like, she can't trust you, right? Or she can't trust that you're going to keep your word, right? Or is this going to happen again? And there's no better feeling than being able to know that, like, not only that when you say you're going to do something, you do it, but like for your wife to really see that, feel that, believe that for herself. That is ultimately what, like, what they're asking for is this like emotional safety. Like, I don't feel safe with you. Sometimes it can be like, what do you mean? Right? That can make you feel defensive. Well, ultimately, it's like being able to be in control in the hard times, to not collapse, to stay open when, like, there's a little bit of vulnerability or a lot of bit of vulnerability there, to ask for what you want, to be able to listen to what she wants, right? These are like basic skills for relationship, really, that, like, I believe men, like, societally speaking, kind of get the short end of the stick on. We don't really get a lot of practice in being able to learn how to regulate our emotions. It's very performance based. It's very task oriented. It's like, did I do good or not? Right? Got to hit a certain standard, right? I got to fix the problem. And on one hand, we get rewarded a lot for that, monetarily. We get that reflected back at our work and our jobs by people like, hey, we did a good job, but because we're really good at fixing things. And sometimes it's not about the fix. Most of the time, it's not about the fix. It's just the being with, right? The not collapsing, the being grounded in a tough time, to maintain that temperature. So if there's big emotions, like, that can be regulated back down. And that's not to say that we're not allowed to be expressive or have big emotions, but it's how we express them. Sometimes, like, if we're not feeling heard and those feelings get too intensified in us, there's a propensity to either shut down or say louder, say the same thing louder. Maybe that'll make the point. But neither of those work. And there's only one answer, and it's learning how to emotionally regulate. Ultimately, that is what puts defensiveness in check and will lead to draining resentment in your relationship, in your marriage, right? And have your wife trusting you and feeling safe with you again. So if this is something that you struggle with, you're not alone, right? If you want to learn more kind of about how I go about doing this, how I help guys doing this, because you see yourself here and you hear it in what I'm talking about, and it's relatable, check out the link in Calendly to book a call with me, and would love to hear more about what's going on for you, again, to see if I can help. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Hopefully this was helpful, and we'll catch you on the next one.